What would you do if a group of self-proclaimed HOA police surrounded you in your driveway, demanded ID, and told you that you were under investigation for violating community rules without knowing that you're actually a federal agent? Yeah, that's the insane real-life HOA story we're diving into today. And before we start, smash that like button if crime, justice, and karma stories are your thing, because this one gets absolutely wild. The morning started like any other suburban weekend. Quiet lawns, distant lawnmowers, the smell of fresh-cut grass floating through a calm neighborhood. Nothing that would ever make you imagine a confrontation. But that normal Saturday morning took a fast left turn the moment I stepped outside to check my mailbox. I noticed a group of 4 figures slowly walking down the road, all wearing navy blue shirts with bold white lettering that said HOA Police. At first, I honestly thought it was a joke, or maybe some neighborhood watch thing, until they suddenly changed direction and began walking straight toward my driveway. I didn't recognize them. They didn't look like neighbors I'd ever seen before, and the second I realized they were intentionally approaching me, I felt that automatic tactical awareness kick in, the kind that never leaves after years of federal work. Their posture wasn't casual. They weren't out for a walk. They were coordinated, almost rehearsed, like people who thought they were conducting an operation. One of them stepped forward and, without introducing himself, ordered me to stay right where I was. I didn't move, not because he told me to, but because I was honestly trying very hard not to laugh at what I was seeing. It was like someone downloaded a low-budget police drama script and decided to star in it themselves. But they didn't look amused, and definitely not friendly. Their expressions were serious, like they believed they actually had real authority. The oldest of them, a woman who appeared to be trying as hard as possible to look official, stepped up and said I was currently being investigated for an HOA rules violation regarding a vehicle parked improperly and suspicious behavior involving tools in my garage. And that was my first sign this wasn't some neighborhood volunteers. This was something else, something crazier, something trying really hard to look official. Now, here's the important part. I don't personally advertise my job to everyone in the neighborhood. I'm just a guy who works remote and keeps to himself, because that's usually the safest and quietest arrangement. So these people approached me like I was just a random homeowner they could intimidate. And trust me, they had no idea the level of wrong they were stepping into. The woman began listing violations they claimed I had committed. They referenced a mysterious complaint that apparently came in from multiple residents. They said I'd been reported for suspicious garage activity and for refusing to cooperate with HOA inquiries. I live in a normal single-family residential neighborhood. We don't even have a functioning HOA. We have something more like a volunteer committee that meets twice a year and mostly argues about landscaping. Nobody has enforcement authority. Nobody has police powers. And nobody certainly walks around wearing shirts declaring themselves HOA police. It would have been funny if it hadn't immediately taken such a serious tone. They tried to surround me in a semicircle as if they were preventing escape. The woman announced that based on homeowner regulations, they were placing me under HOA detention for violating association directives. HOA detention. I genuinely didn't know whether I should laugh, record, or arrest them, because while it's cute to cosplay as a neighborhood officer, pretending to detain someone crosses a completely different legal line. I calmly asked who exactly they were, what authority they believed they had, and where this so-called detention was coming from. They didn't answer with rules or documents, only with escalating commands. They told me to provide identification, proof of residence, and compliance acknowledgement. When I asked if they had an actual legal warrant or any involvement with real law enforcement, one of them stepped forward aggressively and said I didn't need to worry about that. And that's when I noticed the fake badge clipped to his belt. Gold-colored metal, generic emblem, not representing any actual agency, but specifically designed to mimic something federal. That crossed from stupid role-playing into federal crime territory. Impersonating law enforcement is no joke. And here they were, doing it in public, approaching residents, threatening detention, and displaying objects meant to be mistaken for real police identification. At that moment, I already had every reason to detain them and report the incident. But I wanted to see where this was going. Because when criminals impersonate federal authority, things get serious very, very fast. The woman started threatening consequences. She said if I refused to comply, they would take further action. She said they would intervene physically if necessary. That was the moment everything shifted. They weren't just talking. They were escalating. An escalation against a federal agent on his own property is the fastest path to personal disaster. I asked a simple question. What violation exactly had I committed? They said my vehicle wasn't registered with the HOA. That's when I knew something absolutely bizarre was happening. My vehicle is federal government issued. The plates aren't registered in the normal civilian database. And these people were lecturing me about HOA registration like they were patrol officers. It was surreal watching ordinary citizens attempt to enforce a non-existent rule on a federal vehicle. One of them stepped closer, put a hand near my shoulder like he was about to grab me, and demanded I turn around for a compliance check. At that point, the situation went from amusing to dangerous. So I lowered my voice, used the calm professional tone I reserve for active operations, and told him not to touch me. That's when the woman said something that sealed their fate. She told me that failure to cooperate would result in an HOA arrest. HOA arrest. I've worked undercover with organized crime. I've dealt with people who have actually attempted kidnapping. And yet this suburban squad was attempting to perform a fictional arrest on a federal employee in broad daylight. I very calmly repeated that they should not make physical contact and must step off my property immediately. They actually refused. They insisted they were conducting a lawful action. They insisted they represented authority. And then, this is the moment that blew everything wide open. They threatened to call the police on me. Threatening to call actual law enforcement on someone who literally works with actual law enforcement was perhaps the greatest ironic twist possible. They didn't realize the severity of what they just confessed. Because calling police to enforce a fake law is still impersonation. And impersonation crosses straight into federal prosecution. At that moment, it wasn't just neighborhood stupidity. It was criminal behavior. So I moved to end the situation the safest and quickest way possible. I calmly stated that they were currently interfering with federal jurisdiction by impersonating police authority, displaying false law enforcement identifiers, and attempting to detain a federal agent under false authority. The silence that followed was absolute. They stared at me like I'd suddenly spoken another language. They were processing, trying to compute, trying to decide if I was bluffing. I turned slightly so they could clearly see the identification clipped to the inside of my jacket. The reaction was immediate. The two men behind the woman started shifting backward, their posture collapsing from aggressive to terrified. One of them literally took a step away like he wanted to disappear into the sidewalk. But the woman still tried to keep control, saying I needed to verify credentials with the HOA board. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't some random fan club. Someone was directing them. Someone believed they had authority. Someone sent these people with shirts and badges and threats to my house. Before they could retreat, I informed them they were being recorded and that the situation was now officially documented for federal report. Their confidence crumbled. The men suddenly became nervous, glancing around like they feared a real patrol car was about to pull up. The woman's face shifted from commanding to uneasy suspicion. And then, without a word of apology, they turned and started walking away. Fast, like kids caught breaking into something they shouldn't. But as they retreated down my sidewalk, I couldn't help thinking about the bigger issue. Who organized them? Who told them they had enforcement powers? Who gave them badges and shirts? Because ordinary neighbors don't just form fake police departments and go door to door issuing threats. Something deeper was brewing in that neighborhood. And whatever it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The moment they walked away, I wasn't relieved. I was calculating. People don't impersonate law enforcement unless there's organization behind it. Someone coordinated that confrontation. Someone told them what to say, how to act, and what accusations to push. Nobody just wakes up and decides to perform neighborhood arrests dressed like bargain bin SWAT. I went inside, logged the incident in my case notes, and forwarded a quick message to a liaison I trusted. Not a formal report, just enough to document impersonation, attempted detention, and suspicious behavior. Better to have the record created before anything escalated. And I had a feeling it definitely would. I spent the rest of the afternoon running quiet personal surveillance. Not like an operation, more like cautious curiosity. Watching from my window, I noticed something strange. That same group returned about 2 hours later, but this time they weren't approaching homes. They were meeting someone at the end of the street. Someone waiting next to a black SUV I'd never seen before. A woman stepped out of it, different from the earlier one. Older, dressed casually but with an attitude like she owned every property for 3 miles. They formed a little circle, talking, pointing in different directions, and repeatedly glancing toward my house. I couldn't hear a word, but I didn't need to. The body language told me this wasn't over. After maybe 20 minutes, they all got back in vehicles and left. The SUV drove slowly past my house, like they wanted me to know they were watching. I didn't react. Never give someone escalation energy they can feed off. Just observe, record, file away. For a couple days, nothing happened. I started thinking maybe they had a moment of reality and backed off. That illusion ended the moment I found a notice taped to my door with an official-looking HOA letterhead claiming I was in violation of multiple administrative directives, including surveillance equipment use, property modification, and failure to acknowledge community enforcement. It demanded I report to an HOA compliance meeting scheduled at a private residence. Private residence. They were literally inviting me to a house to be interrogated by fake authority. I knew exactly what this was. Someone attempting to build a pseudo-government authority inside a neighborhood. Someone so power-drunk they believed paperwork and shirts made them law enforcement. I didn't respond. Instead, I photographed everything, logged it, and forwarded it directly to an appropriate unit. This was becoming a real case. Impersonation, attempted unlawful detention, misuse of government emblems, and possible fraudulent organization. All federal crimes. The next weekend, it escalated again. I was working on my backyard patio when I heard footsteps approaching behind the house. That grabbed my attention instantly because my backyard is fenced, locked, and absolutely not accessible to random neighbors. By the time I stepped around, I saw 2 of those same fake officers standing inside my yard examining my shed. Not the tool shed, my secure equipment shed. They didn't know what was inside, but they definitely shouldn't have been anywhere near it. They jumped when they saw me like they'd been caught trespassing in a federal compound, which technically, yes, they were. One of them tried to bluff that they were inspecting HOA property compliance. I informed them they were currently committing criminal trespass and interfering with federal restricted equipment. They froze. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply stated, in the calm tone reserved for official warnings, that they were now creating federal liability exposure. They backed away so fast they nearly tripped over each other trying to exit my yard. At that point, it wasn't even questionable. These people didn't just think they were enforcing HOA rules. They believed they were a police agency. They were escalating into private security territory without any legal authority whatsoever. The final straw came 2 days later when I was returning home from a grocery run and found a group standing in my driveway, once again wearing those ridiculous HOA police shirts. But this time, they didn't look confident. They looked nervous. I could tell immediately something had shifted. The same SUV from before was parked behind them, blocking part of the road. The older woman stepped forward and demanded I answer their questions regarding my property. She spoke with that tone suburban tyrants use when they've convinced themselves they're government officials. She said I was being formally cited. And then, this was the unbelievable part, requested I surrender certain sensitive materials. Sensitive materials? As if I was storing classified documents inside my garage. This wasn't HOA activity. This was delusion mixed with serious criminal behavior. I calmly asked a single question. Are you acting under any recognized law enforcement authorization? She answered yes. That was all I needed. Right there, on camera from my house security system, I recorded her openly claiming police authority. That alone was enough to initiate a serious federal response. I dialed a direct contact, not 911, not local police dispatch, a direct federal field number. Within minutes, everything changed. The fake HOA police watched my expression shift from calm homeowner to something else. Something they didn't understand. A quiet authority that didn't match their little role-play scenario. About 10 minutes later, real patrol vehicles slowly rolled down the street. No lights, no sirens, just normal approach. Professional, careful, controlled. The fake officers saw them and immediately panicked. One tried to walk away like he suddenly remembered he had groceries in the car. Another tried to take off his shirt to hide the lettering. The woman stepped back toward the SUV, trying to look casual. Real officers stepped out, approached them calmly, and started asking routine questions. Identification, reason for being on my property, purpose of the attempted citation, and authority for law enforcement claims. Their answers were painfully obvious lies. They stuttered, contradicted themselves, blamed the HOA board, blamed written directives, blamed community approval. None of it held. Then the real officers noticed the badges. That was when everything got serious. They separated the group, radioed supervisors, and began recording evidence. The woman attempted to explain they were a neighborhood enforcement group, but you could see panic rising behind her eyes. This wasn't a joking matter anymore. This was real police asking real legal questions. One of the men tried to slip away and get into a car, but officers stopped him. The SUV driver closed the door and attempted to drive off, until blocked by a patrol car nose in. You could see her realize in real time that this situation just turned into actual criminal charges. The officers spoke with me privately, verified credentials, reviewed documents, reviewed the video, and immediately recognized the scope of impersonation. They called in additional units, not sirens again, but professional response levels appropriate for impersonation of federal authority. Within an hour, more vehicles arrived. The HOA imposters were detained, questioned, and eventually placed in real handcuffs. No yelling, no drama, just procedural, methodical removal of individuals pretending to be law enforcement. And I stood quietly in my driveway, watching people who tried to arrest me now being escorted away by actual police. The best moment came when one of them loudly protested that, "He can't arrest us. He's not real FBI." The officers turned, looked at me, and I presented actual credentials. The silence that followed was priceless. One of the officers said something I'll never forget, very calmly, almost like a reminder. "Impersonating federal authority is a felony. This isn't a game." And the look on that group's faces told me everything. They genuinely thought their HOA fantasy made them police. They had absolutely no idea what they were playing with. Eventually, charges were filed. Impersonation, attempted unlawful detention, criminal trespass, and several other federal-level offenses depending on the exact specifics of how they obtained badges and shirts. I learned later there was a person on the HOA committee who engineered the whole idea of a private enforcement division. She apparently believed HOA boards have the same authority as police. She convinced a handful of gullible neighbors to join her fake squad. But here's the best part. I didn't have to expose myself publicly. There was no dramatic badge flash in front of the neighborhood. The real officers handled everything. And the HOA authority collapsed overnight. The entire board was dissolved by emergency vote. The committee was restructured under strict legal supervision. And those individuals are now permanently banned from any enforcement-related position in the future. The neighborhood became quieter than ever after that. Peaceful, respectful, people waved more, people minded their own business. And the best part? The fake HOA police shirts disappeared forever. Sometimes the world teaches people the hard way that pretending to be law enforcement isn't a hobby. And sometimes the universe lines things up so perfectly that the person they try to arrest just happens to be the one person they should never have messed with.